6 months after the viral flight incident, Maya stood in front of a full auditorium at Howard University Medical School. Her book, First Class: Breaking Barriers in Medicine and Life, had just become a national bestseller. All proceeds were going to a scholarship fund for minority medical students. The room was packed with young faces, each one representing a dream of making it in medicine. Maya touched her grandmother's pearls, now famous from all the news coverage, and began her speech. "When I boarded that flight 6 months ago, I was just a doctor heading to a conference," she said. "I never imagined that moment would change so many lives, including my own." In the front row sat Barbara Wells, who had become an unexpected partner in Maya's journey. After their flight, Barbara had started speaking at schools about the importance of confronting unconscious bias. Today, she was here to announce a new scholarship she had created for Black women entering medical school. "My mistake that day taught me something important," Barbara told the audience. "Change starts when we admit our prejudices and actively work to overcome them." Her voice shook with emotion as she spoke. The Richardson Initiative, the mentorship program Maya had started at Atlanta Memorial Hospital, was now running in 50 hospitals across the country. Over 500 minority medical students had found mentors through the program. Tiana Johnson, the resident from the flight, was now helping run the New York branch. During the speech, Maya's phone buzzed with a message from Jessica Chen. The original Twitter thread had reached 10 million people and was being used in diversity training programs worldwide. Major airlines had changed their staff training procedures, using the incident as a teaching example. But the real change, Maya continued, isn't in the numbers or programs. It's in the small moments that happen every day. She shared stories of how things were slowly changing. More Black doctors being treated with respect, more young minority students believing in their dreams, more people speaking up when they witnessed discrimination. After the speech, a group of young Black girls from a local middle school lined up to meet Maya. Each wore a white coat decorated with encouraging messages. Their science teacher had brought them after reading Maya's book. "Dr. Richardson," one girl said shyly, "I want to be a brain surgeon like you. My mom says I can do it now because you showed us how." Maya hugged the girl, remembering her own childhood dreams. "You absolutely can," she said. "And when you do, remember to help the next girl who dreams of becoming a doctor." Later that evening, at a small dinner celebration, Maya's mother presented her with a special gift, her grandmother's nursing diploma from 1959, freshly framed. "She faced so much more than we can imagine," her mother said, "but she kept going, just like you." The next morning, Maya had a meeting with the American Medical Association. They were launching a new initiative called Medicine for All, inspired by her story. The program would focus on creating pathways for underrepresented groups in all medical specialties. As Maya walked into the meeting, she passed a wall of photos showing the history of medicine in America. Someone had recently added a new photo. It was her on that famous flight, standing tall in her navy suit and pearls, showing her medical badge to Barbara. "That photo represents a turning point," the NMA president told her. "It's not just about one incident anymore. It's about changing the whole system." Back in her office that afternoon, Maya received an email from a flight attendant who had been on that fateful flight. She was now a medical student, inspired by Maya's example to pursue her own dreams. Maya smiled as she typed her response, encouraging the former flight attendant to stay strong and believe in herself. On her desk sat a framed copy of her book cover, next to a photo of her grandmother in her nurse's uniform. The last email of the day was from a young doctor in South Africa. "Your story reached us here. Today, I walked into first class with my head held high. Thank you for showing us how to change things with dignity." Maya looked out at the Atlanta skyline, thinking about how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. The journey hadn't ended with that flight, it had only begun. Every day, somewhere in the world, someone was learning to see beyond their assumptions, and someone else was finding the courage to stand tall in their truth. She touched her grandmother's pearls one more time and smiled. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of courage. And sometimes, a simple flight can lead to a first-class movement for change. A week after the conference, Maya sat in her office at Atlanta Memorial Hospital, looking at the wall of emails, interview requests, and speaking invitations that had flooded in. Her simple flight to San Francisco had started something much bigger than she ever expected. The morning started with a surprise visit from Dr. Sarah Chen, her colleague. Maya, have you seen this? She held up her phone showing a video of a young black girl, maybe 12 years old, wearing a toy stethoscope and holding a sign that read, Future Dr. Richardson. The video had over 2 million views. People are calling it the hashtag #FutureDRichardson Challenge, Sarah explained. Kids all over the country are sharing their dreams of becoming doctors. You've inspired them to believe they belong anywhere they want to be. Maya's eyes filled with tears as she watched more videos. Children of all backgrounds were posting their own stories, wearing doctor costumes and talking about breaking barriers. Parents were sharing how their kids now had a new role model to look up to. Her phone rang. It was Barbara Wells again. The woman from the plane had become an unexpected ally in the movement for change. Dr. Richardson, Barbara said, I've been speaking at my social clubs about what happened. Many of my friends admitted they'd made similar assumptions. We're learning, and we're trying to do better. Later that afternoon, Maya had a meeting with the hospital board. They wanted to start a new mentorship program for underrepresented medical students, and they wanted her to lead it. The program would be called the Richardson Initiative. We want to turn this moment into lasting change, the board chairman said. Your story showed us that we need to do more than just talk about diversity. We need to actively support it. During her lunch break, Maya checked her social media. Jessica Chen's original Twitter thread had now reached over 5 million people. Major companies were sharing it as part of their diversity training. Schools were using it to teach students about respect and assumptions. A knock on her office door revealed Tiana Johnson, the resident from the flight. She had flown to Atlanta specifically to meet with Maya. I got offered a neurosurgery fellowship, Tiana announced excitedly. The interview panel said your story made them realize they needed to expand their diversity initiatives. Maya hugged the young doctor, remembering her own fellowship interviews and how lonely they had felt. Times are changing, Tiana. We're making sure of that. In the afternoon, Maya received an interesting email from a major publisher. They wanted her to write a book about her experiences as a black woman in medicine. The advance was generous, but more importantly, they promised to donate copies to schools in underserved communities. Her mother called while Maya was considering the book offer. Baby, she said, I found something you need to see. She had discovered an old photo of Maya's grandmother, standing proudly in her nurse's uniform in 1960. She faced so much more than we did, but she never gave up. Just like you. Maya touched the pearls at her neck, her grandmother's pearls, and made a decision. She would write the book, not just about that one flight, but about all the moments that had led to it. About her grandmother's strength, her parents' sacrifices, and every person who had faced similar challenges. As the day went down, Maya received a special video message. It was from a group of flight attendants across different airlines. They had started their own initiative to improve diversity training in the airline industry, inspired by her story. Your grace under pressure showed us all how to handle difficult situations, one flight attendant said in the video. We're making sure our staff and passengers learn from this. Before leaving the office, Maya opened one last email. It was from a small girl in Minnesota. Dear Dr. Richardson, I'm 8 years old, and I want to be a doctor like you. My teacher says I can do anything if I work hard. Is that true? Maya smiled and began typing her response. Dear Sarah, yes, it's absolutely true. And when you become a doctor, I hope you'll help others believe in their dreams too. Looking out her office window at the Atlanta sunset, Maya thought about how life can change in unexpected ways. What had started as an uncomfortable moment on a plane had grown into a movement for change, touching lives across the country. Sometimes the best responses to ignorance weren't just about proving people wrong. They were about showing others what was possible. The next morning, Maya woke up early to prepare for her conference speech. Her hotel room phone was ringing nonstop with interview requests from major news channels. The story had grown even bigger overnight, with over 1 million shares across different social media platforms. Her original presentation about brain surgery techniques was now scheduled for 10 a.m., followed by a special afternoon session about diversity in medicine at 2 p.m. The conference hall, which usually held 500 people, was already full an hour before her first speech. People were standing in the back, and a line stretched into the lobby. Dr. Richardson, said Amy Jean, the conference coordinator, rushing up to her backstage. We've had to set up video screens in 3 overflow rooms. We've never had this many people attend a session before. Maya stood behind the curtain, touching her grandmother's pearls for luck. She could hear the excited buzz of the crowd. Medical students, doctors, and healthcare professionals from all backgrounds had come to hear both her medical expertise and her personal story. Dr. James Wilson introduced her to thunderous applause. As Maya walked to the podium, she saw faces of all colors looking back at her with admiration and support. Deanna Johnson, the resident from the flight, sat in the front row, frantically taking notes. Before I begin discussing advances in pediatric neurosurgery, Maya started, her voice clear and strong. I want to thank everyone who has shared their own stories over the past day. You've shown that one small moment can spark an important conversation. The morning session went perfectly. Maya's medical presentation showed why she was one of the top neurosurgeons in the country. The audience was captivated by her innovative surgical techniques and research findings. But everyone knew the afternoon session would be different. During lunch break, Maya's phone buzzed with a message from Barbara Wells. "I'm watching your speech online. My grandson is a pre-med student, and we're both learning so much. Thank you for turning my mistake into a teaching moment." The afternoon session was even more crowded than the morning one. News cameras lined the back wall. Maya had changed from her usual presentation slides to photos showing diverse medical professionals at work. Her first image was of her own medical school graduation, standing proud with her parents. "Look around this room," she began. "Do you see the future of medicine? It doesn't look like just one type of person. Excellence comes in every color, every gender, every background." As she spoke, people in the audience began sharing their own stories. A black female cardiologist talked about being mistaken for a nurse every day. An Asian male nurse described being questioned about why he wasn't a doctor. A Hispanic surgeon shared how patients sometimes refused to believe she was their doctor. The session ran 2 hours over schedule, but nobody left. Maya's story had opened a door, and now others were walking through it. Hospital administrators in the audience were taking notes about changing their diversity policies. Medical school deans were rethinking their recruitment strategies. Jessica Chen, who had also attended the conference, was still updating her Twitter thread, watching history being made. Dr. Richardson isn't just sharing her story. She's changing how we think about representation in medicine. #changing medicine, #Richardson. Major medical organizations began reaching out. The American Medical Association wanted Maya to lead a new committee on diversity in healthcare. 3 medical schools asked her to give commencement speeches. A publishing company even suggested writing a book about her experiences. At the end of the day, as Maya packed up her presentation materials, a group of young black medical students approached her. Dr. Richardson, one of them said, tears in her eyes, "We've always been told to stay quiet when these things happen, but you showed us we can speak up with dignity." Maya hugged each of them, remembering her own struggles through medical school. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her mother. "Your voice is reaching places you never imagined, baby. This is bigger than a first-class seat now." Looking out at the setting sun through the conference center windows, Maya realized her mother was right. What had started as an uncomfortable moment on a plane was turning into a movement for change. Sometimes the biggest transformations start with the smallest moments. When the plane landed at San Francisco International Airport, Maya turned on her phone to find it exploding with notifications. Her email inbox had over 200 new messages. Her sister had sent 5 urgent texts, and her hospital's PR department was trying to reach her. Dr. Richardson, Jessica Chen said, approaching her as passengers started to get up. "I think you should know. Your story has gone viral. Major news networks are picking it up, and people all over the country are sharing similar experiences." Maya sat there for a moment, taking it all in. Her simple morning flight had somehow turned into a national conversation. She opened Twitter to find #DrRichardson and #FirstClassWhiteBlack trending. People were sharing the story along with their own experiences of being judged by their appearance. As she walked through the airport terminal, Maya noticed people looking at her, some even taking quick photos with their phones. A young airport worker stopped her near baggage claim. "Dr. Richardson, my mom's a nurse, and she just sent me your story. Thank you for standing up with such grace." Maya's phone rang. It was Dr. Sarah Chen, her colleague from Atlanta. "Maya, Have you seen what's happening? CNN wants to interview you. So does the Today Show. The American Medical Association is talking about featuring your story in their next newsletter. In the taxi to her hotel, Maya read through some of the social media posts. Black professionals from every field were sharing their stories. Lawyers mistaken for janitors, executives mistaken for assistants, professors mistaken for cleaning staff. Her story had opened a floodgate of similar experiences. The hotel lobby was buzzing with activity when she arrived. Several other doctors were there for the medical conference, and many recognized her from the viral story. Dr. James Wilson, the conference organizer, was waiting for her. Dr. Richardson, he said warmly, we've had an overwhelming response. Would you be willing to add a short speech about diversity in medicine to tomorrow's program? We think it's an important conversation to have. Maya thought about the presentation she had carefully prepared about brain surgery techniques and medical innovations. Now she had a chance to talk about something equally important. Yes, she said, I'll do it. Up in her hotel room, Maya finally had a moment to call her mother. Baby, her mom said, crying a little, you're trending on Twitter. Your daddy would have been so proud of how you handled that situation. Maya felt tears in her eyes too. Her father, who had passed away 2 years ago, had always taught her to face discrimination with dignity. I just did what you and Dad taught me, Mom. A new email popped up on her phone. It was from Barbara Wells. The message was simple but sincere. Dr. Richardson, I've been watching how my mistake has started an important conversation. My daughter is a teacher, and she wants to use your story to teach her students about assumptions and respect. Would that be okay? Maya smiled and typed a quick yes. The medical conference organizers had set up an impromptu evening meeting to discuss adding Maya's new speech to tomorrow's schedule. As she walked into the conference room, she found it packed with doctors, medical students, and hospital administrators, all wanting to be part of this conversation. Tiana Johnson, the resident from the flight, had also been invited. She sat in the front row, beaming with pride as Maya took the podium to discuss her ideas for tomorrow's speech. This isn't just about one incident on a plane, Maya began. It's about every person who's ever been judged by their appearance rather than their abilities. It's about changing the face of medicine and every other profession to reflect the real diversity of our world. The room burst into applause. Someone from the back shouted, "You go, Dr. Richardson." Later that night, as Maya sat in her hotel room preparing her new speech, she received a message from Jessica Chen. The original Twitter thread had reached over 500,000 retweets. Major newspapers wanted to run the story. Television shows were calling. Maya looked out her hotel window at the San Francisco skyline. Tomorrow, she would talk about brain surgery and breaking barriers. She would speak for every person who had ever been underestimated or overlooked. Her grandmother's pearls sat on the bedside table, reminding her of all the strong women who had paved the way for this moment. Her phone buzzed one last time, a text from her sister. You didn't just handle this with grace, sis. You started a movement. The morning sun had barely risen when Dr. Maya Richardson checked her phone one last time before heading to Atlanta International Airport. It was 5:30 a.m., and her flight to San Francisco was scheduled for 7:45 a.m. She always arrived early at airports, a habit her father had taught her. Being late is not an option for people like us, he used to say. We have to be twice as prepared. At 34 years old, Maya had already made a name for herself in the medical community. She was one of the youngest neurosurgeons at Atlanta Memorial Hospital, with a success rate that impressed even her most experienced colleagues. Today's flight would take her to a major medical conference where she would present her groundbreaking research on minimally invasive brain surgery techniques. Maya looked at herself in the mirror of her bathroom one final time. Her dark skin glowed with natural beauty, enhanced by minimal makeup, just enough to look professional but not overdone. She adjusted her navy blue suit, making sure it sat perfectly on her slim frame. The pearl earrings her grandmother had given her at her medical school graduation caught the light, bringing a soft smile to her face. They were her lucky charm, a reminder of her family's sacrifices and support. Her natural hair was styled in neat, professional braids, a style that had taken her trusted hairdresser 3 hours to perfect the day before. Maya remembered the long conversations she'd had with her mentor about appearance in professional settings. Be yourself, Dr. Watson had told her, but remember that every detail will be noticed. The Uber ride to the airport was quiet. Maya used this time to review her presentation on her tablet. The driver, an elderly man named James, noticed her concentration in the rearview mirror. "Big day ahead?" he asked kindly. "Yes," Maya replied with a warm smile. "I'm presenting at a medical conference in San Francisco." "A doctor. My granddaughter wants to be a doctor too. She's in high school now, getting straight A's," James said proudly. "Tell her to keep working hard. The world needs more dedicated doctors," Maya responded, thinking about her own journey and the many obstacles she had overcome. At the airport, Maya moved through security with practiced ease. She had her TSA pre-check ready, her laptop easily accessible, and her carry-on perfectly packed. Years of traveling for medical conferences had taught her the art of efficient airport navigation. The first-class lounge was quiet at this early hour. Maya chose a comfortable seat near the window, watching planes take off into the pink and orange sky. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to her mother. "About to board. Will call when I land in SF." Her mother's response came quickly. "Proud of you, baby. Show them what you've got." As boarding time approached, Maya gathered her belongings. Her carry-on contained her conference materials, a change of clothes. "Always be prepared," her mother's voice echoed, and her lucky scrub cap, the one she wore during her first solo surgery. Walking to the gate, Maya noticed the usual mix of reactions she'd grown accustomed to over years of flying first class. Some people did double takes, others quickly looked away, and a few smiled genuinely. She had learned to navigate these spaces with grace, holding her head high while carrying the invisible weight of being often the only black woman in premium cabins. The gate agent checking boarding passes greeted her with a professional nod. "Good morning, Dr. Richardson. You'll be in seat 2 today." Maya appreciated when people read her title correctly. It was a small thing that shouldn't matter, but somehow still did. As she walked down the jet bridge, Maya mentally prepared herself for the flight ahead. She needed to review her presentation one more time and perhaps get some rest before the conference. Her phone buzzed with a message from her colleague Dr. Sarah Chen. "Knock them dead in SF. Can't wait to hear how it goes." Maya boarded the plane, finding her seat in the first-class cabin. The leather seat was wide and comfortable, a luxury she had earned through years of hard work. She stored her carry-on in the overhead compartment and settled in, pulling out her tablet once again. As other passengers began boarding, she remained focused on her work, unaware that the next few hours would change her life in ways she never expected. The first-class cabin was filling up slowly. Maya had just opened her presentation slides when she heard someone clearing their throat loudly next to her seat. She looked up to see an older white woman, probably in her mid-60s, wearing expensive clothes and too much jewelry for a morning flight. "Here," Barbara Wells said sharply, thrusting her designer carry-on bag toward Maya without making eye contact. "This needs to go in the overhead compartment." She was already turning away, digging through her purse for something, clearly expecting her bag to be taken care of immediately. Maya sat still for a moment, her hand frozen over her tablet. In her 10 years of flying first class, this wasn't the first time someone had mistaken her for the help. She felt the familiar mix of emotions rising: frustration, disappointment, and a touch of anger. But years of working in high-pressure situations as a surgeon had taught her to stay calm and think clearly. Around them, other first-class passengers were watching. A young white man across the aisle had stopped typing on his laptop, his mouth slightly open in shock. 2 rows ahead, an Asian businessman turned in his seat, frowning at the scene. Maya could feel their eyes on her, waiting to see what would happen next. "Excuse me," Barbara said impatiently, now looking directly at Maya for the first time. "Did you hear me? The bag needs to go up." Her voice was getting louder, drawing even more attention. Maya took a deep breath. She thought about all the times her mother had told her, "How you handle difficult moments shows who you really are." She thought about her young patients at the hospital who looked up to her, about the medical students she mentored who faced similar situations. Slowly and deliberately, Maya stood up. At her full height of 5 feet 8 inches, she was eye level with Barbara. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her medical conference badge, complete with her credentials and photo. The motion was smooth, practiced. She had learned to keep proof of her identity easily accessible. "I'm Dr. Maya Richardson," she said in a clear, professional voice that carried just far enough. I'll be giving the keynote speech at tomorrow's National Neurosurgery Summit in San Francisco. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. I'm not a flight attendant, but I'm sure one of the actual crew members would be happy to help you with your bag. The color drained from Barbara's face, then quickly returned as a deep red flush spread from her neck to her cheeks. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The expensive bag hung limply from her hand. A real flight attendant, who had noticed the commotion, quickly appeared. Is everything all right here? She asked, looking between Maya and Barbara with concern. Yes, thank you, Maya replied calmly. This lady needs help with her bag. She sat back down, returning to her presentation as if nothing had happened. Barbara stammered out an awkward apology that sounded more embarrassed than sincere. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. I just assumed. Her words trailed off as the flight attendant took her bag and directed her to her seat. 3 rows behind Maya. The cabin had gone quiet. Maya could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a scalpel. From across the aisle, a young black woman in a business suit caught her eye and gave her a subtle nod. A gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. A few seats away, someone was typing rapidly on their phone. Maya didn't know it yet, but one of the passengers was Jessica Chen, a social media influencer with over 500,000 followers. Jessica had captured the entire exchange and, impressed by Maya's graceful handling of the situation, was already crafting a post that would soon go viral. Maya returned to reviewing her presentation, her hands steady, but her heart beating a little faster than normal. She thought about her grandmother's pearls at her ears, a reminder of all the strong women in her family who had faced similar moments with dignity. She wouldn't let this incident distract her from her purpose. She had an important speech to give tomorrow, lives to change, and barriers to break. As the flight attendants began their pre-flight checks, Maya received a text from her sister. "You've got this, sis. Show them what a Richardson woman can do." She smiled, not knowing just how prophetic those words would prove to be. As the plane took off from Atlanta, Maya tried to focus on her presentation, but her mind kept returning to what had just happened. The air in first class still felt heavy with unspoken words. She could hear quiet whispers behind her, other passengers discussing the incident in low voices. Jessica Chen, the social media influencer sitting a few seats away, had already posted about the incident on Twitter. Her fingers had moved quickly across her phone screen as she wrote, "Just witnessed something on my flight that perfectly shows what Black professionals deal with every day." A respected neurosurgeon was mistaken for staff, and her response was pure class. Thread incoming. The post was gaining attention even before the plane reached cruising altitude. Jessica had included a brief description of the scene, being careful not to identify anyone directly. She focused on Maya's calm and professional response, highlighting how such incidents happen far too often. About an hour into the flight, a head flight attendant, Sarah Wilson, approached Maya's seat. "Dr. Richardson," she said quietly, "I want to apologize for what happened earlier. Would you like anything special from our first-class menu? Maybe a glass of champagne?" Maya smiled kindly at Sarah. "Thank you, but I'm fine with just water. I need to stay sharp for tomorrow's presentation." She appreciated the gesture but didn't want special treatment. That wasn't the point. Meanwhile, 3 rows back, Barbara Wells sat stiffly in her seat, her face still flushed with embarrassment. She had taken out a magazine but hadn't turned a single page in 20 minutes. The weight of her mistake was sinking in deeper with each passing moment. A young black woman across the aisle, who had nodded at Maya earlier, finally gathered the courage to speak up. She leaned over and introduced herself. "Dr. Richardson, I'm Tiana Johnson, a medical resident at Johns Hopkins. I've read your research on pediatric brain tumors. You're kind of my hero." Maya's face softened into a genuine smile. This was why she handled difficult moments with grace, for young women like Tiana, who needed to see that it was possible to maintain dignity in the face of prejudice. "It's nice to meet you, Tiana," Maya replied warmly. "How are you finding your residency?" They began a quiet conversation about medicine, mentorship, and navigating challenges in the medical field. Unknown to both women, their conversation was being overheard by several passengers, including a hospital administrator from San Francisco who was making mental notes about diversity initiatives at his institution. Jessica's Twitter thread continued to gain traction. Her followers were retweeting and sharing their own similar experiences. By the time the drink service began, her initial post had over 5,000 retweets. "You handled that situation incredibly well," Jessica finally said to Maya, walking over during a bathroom break. "Would you mind if I mentioned your upcoming speech at the neurosurgery conference? I think people would be interested in hearing more about your work." Maya thought about it carefully. She hadn't planned on becoming the center of a viral moment, but maybe this was an opportunity to address bigger issues. "Yes, you can mention the conference," she agreed. "If this helps spark a meaningful conversation about assumptions and respect, that's important." Back in her seat, Maya received an email from her conference organizers. They had somehow already heard about the incident and wanted to know if she'd be willing to add a few words about diversity in medicine to her speech tomorrow. The story was spreading faster than she had imagined. She looked out the window at the clouds below, thinking about how a simple morning flight had turned into something much bigger. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother, who had no idea what had happened. "Remember, baby, sometimes the hardest moments are just doorways to something important." Maya smiled at her mother's accidental wisdom. She opened her presentation again, this time adding a new slide at the end. It would be about breaking barriers, challenging assumptions, and the importance of handling difficult moments with grace. Not because she had to, but because somewhere, another young black girl might be watching and learning how to navigate these waters. As the flight continued westward, Maya felt a strange sense of peace. Sometimes the most powerful messages weren't planned. They simply came from living your truth with dignity. She took out her notebook and began writing down her thoughts. Tomorrow's speech would be about more than just neurosurgery now. 2 hours into the flight to San Francisco, Jessica Chen's Twitter thread had exploded. Her phone kept buzzing with notifications as the story spread across social media platforms. The original post now had over 25,000 retweets, and hashtag #DeRichartson was starting to trend. Maya was unaware of her growing internet fame. She had turned off her phone's data to focus on adjusting her presentation. But around her, the story was taking on a life of its own. Passengers who had witnessed the incident were sharing it on their own social media accounts, each adding their perspective to what they had seen. The flight attendant, Sarah Wilson, passed through the cabin again, this time stopping at Barbara Wells's seat. Barbara hadn't touched her lunch, and her hands shook slightly as she held her water glass. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" Sarah asked quietly. "No," Barbara admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I made a terrible mistake. I need to apologize properly, but I don't know how." She looked toward Maya's seat, then quickly looked away, shame evident on her face. Sarah thought for a moment before speaking. "Sometimes the best apologies are the simple, honest ones," she suggested gently. "Would you like me to ask Dr. Richardson if she'd be willing to speak with you?" Meanwhile, at the front of first class, Tiana Johnson had moved to the empty seat next to Maya during a quiet period of the flight. The two women were deep in conversation about the challenges of medical school and residency. "How do you do it?" Tiana asked, her voice full of admiration. "Stay so calm when things like this happen." Maya took a thoughtful sip of her water. "You know, in surgery, we can't let emotions take over, no matter what happens. That training helps in life too." She smiled warmly at the young resident. "But mostly, I think about the bigger picture. Every time we respond to ignorance with dignity, we change something small in the world." Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah, who approached with an apologetic expression. "Dr. Richardson, I'm sorry to disturb you, but Mrs. Wells would like to speak with you, if you're willing." Maya sat quietly for a moment, considering the request. She could feel other passengers watching, waiting to see what she would do. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, she can come talk to me." Barbara walked slowly to Maya's seat, looking much smaller than she had during their first interaction. Her designer outfit somehow seemed less impressive now, and her confident attitude was completely gone. "Dr. Richardson," Barbara began, her voice shaking slightly, "I am truly sorry for my behavior earlier. I made an assumption based on prejudice, if I'm honest. There's no excuse for what I did." Maya looked at Barbara steadily, seeing not just an angry older woman now, but someone capable of recognizing their mistakes. "Thank you for the apology, Mrs. Wells. I appreciate your honesty. I've been thinking about it this whole flight. Barbara continued, wringing her hands. I have grandchildren your age, and I would be horrified if someone treated them the way I treated you. I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know I've learned from this. Maya nodded, noticing how the other passengers had gone quiet to listen. We all have opportunities to learn and grow, Mrs. Wells. What matters is that we take them. The conversation might have continued, but a sudden announcement came over the plane's speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. As Barbara returned to her seat, Jessica was already updating her Twitter thread. UPDATE. Just witnessed a powerful moment of accountability and grace at 35,000 feet. This story isn't just about one incident, it's about how we handle our mistakes and learn from them. Hashtag Durachartson. The turbulence shook the plane gently as Maya looked out her window. Below, the landscape had changed from green to brown as they crossed the country. She thought about how this flight was turning into something much more than just a trip to a medical conference. Her phone lit up with a text from her sister. Check your email when you land. Something big is happening. Maya raised an eyebrow, wondering what else this remarkable day would bring. The plane continued westward, carrying not just passengers now, but a story that would soon touch thousands of lives.